I traveled here tonight from the Middle East, a part of the world that dangerous fires are burning, region of the globe that the rule of law does not govern, that basic human rights are breached. This is the place where myself and other young Jewish lawyers set out to impose measure of justice, to impose accountability of the groups that try to terrorize the Jewish state. The rockets attacked from Gaza over Sderot, the smuggling missiles in Lebanon, the riots in Jerusalem are continuing and continuing, and there is no end in sight. The terror organizations think that they finally found the key that will destroy the Jewish state and will drive us from our land. The governments of Iran, Syria, North Korea are pouring millions and millions of dollars into the hands of the terror organizations in order to keep the pot boiling and to make sure that more and more Jewish life will be lost. Israel, as a Jewish democratic state, faced a challenge. She has to fight for its survival. It has to fight for the safety of their people to live safely in their country. It has to fight for its security without being accused with violating human rights, without being accused of committing war crimes. We, in Shurat Hadin, Israel Law Center, took this challenge and decided to fight those terror regimes in court. Drag them to the court of law and impose some measure of justice on these terror regimes. In the past 10 years, we represented hundreds of terror victims in lawsuits and legal actions that they are taking against the Palestinian terror organizations and their financial patrons, against Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Fatah Tanzim, PLO, Hezbollah, against regimes like the Palestinian Authority, Iran, Syria, North Korea, Egypt, against banks that are providing financial services to terror organizations, like American Express Bank, National Westminster, Credit Lyonnais, UBS, Lebanese Canadian Bank, and Bank of China. We are fighting terrorism in court. And tonight, I would like to speak to you about a portion of these cases. I regularly meet with the intelligence agencies in Israel, and they all tell me the same thing. If you cut the funding, you can cut the terrorism. If you stop the flow of the money, you stop the flow of the terrorism, because the terror organizations need the funds. They need the facilities. They cannot do without it. We filed 2 more cases against European banks, once against National Westminster in London, the other one against Credit Lyonnais in France. Both banks were charged with the Israeli Mossad for providing financial services to Islamic charities that raise funds for Hamas, Interpol in England and CBSP in France. The banks were asked to close down the account, but they refused. So we took them to court. And right after we took them to court, they immediately changed their way of doing businesses. From that day, every time they want to open a bank account to an Islamic charity, they go to the Israeli Mossad to ask if it's kosher. We filed another case against Lebanese Canadian Bank, who provides financial services to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah in Lebanon is acting under 2 foundations, one called Yusr Foundation, the other called Martyr Foundation. But we didn't want to sue only Lebanese Canadian Bank. It's a bank based in Lebanon. If we get a judgment against them, none of us is going to Lebanon to collect it. And there was an American bank in the picture, because all the wire transactions were made in dollar, were facilitated by the correspondent American bank of Lebanese Canadian Bank. We wanted to sue this bank We did a research and we found out that the correspondent American bank of Lebanese Canadian Bank is American Express Bank. We gathered 30 terror victims that were killed or injured by Hezbollah in the Second Lebanese War in Israel and filed a lawsuit against Lebanese Canadian Bank and against American Express Bank in a federal court of New York. Recently, we filed a lawsuit against the Bank of China. The Bank of China had a bank account for a Hamas activist named Shurafa. Shurafa was chased away from Gaza by the Israeli forces and landed in Beijing. He opened a bank account and was receiving money from the headquarters of Hamas in Syria, $100,000 at a time. It actually did not reach the 100,000. It always stopped in the 99.999, not to be scrutinized by the banking system. Once the money was hitting his account in Beijing, Shurafa was cashing the money out and sending it to his brother, another Hamas activist in Gaza. The counterterrorism division of the Israeli government met with the Central Bank of China, met with officials of the Treasury in China, and urged them to close down the account. But the Chinese said that Hamas is not a terror organization. We took them to court. We gathered 86 terror victims from Sderot who got killed or injured by the missile attacks of Hamas from Gaza, and we filed a lawsuit against Bank of China in New York. This lawsuit drove the Chinese crazy. It was right before the Olympic Games. They wrote us personal letters threatening us to stop talking about the lawsuit. They warned us that by talking about the lawsuit and connecting their name to terror financing, we are destroying their reputation, we are ruining their names. They threatened us with a libel suit against us in China and with criminal persecution against us in China. This is why, on the way over here, we did not stop in Hong Kong. But we will not stop talking about this lawsuit or any other lawsuit. Citibank has a slogan. We're trying to make banking easier. We have a slogan. We're trying to make banking much harder to the terrorists. We'll keep fighting the Bank of China because our terror victims keep fighting. One of the plaintiffs of this lawsuit is the parents of a young girl and a young boy. The girl was 17 years old. Her name was Ella Abu Kassis. She went with her brother, 15 years old, Tamir, one Shabbat to Bnei Akiva, while they heard the red alert that goes off when the missile comes from Gaza. In these instances, you must find a shelter. You either go underneath a bus stop or you go underneath a building. But the street was empty. So the first thing that went into her mind was to protect her brother. She jumped and covered her brother. The missile fell right near their heads, and shrapnels went into their both heads. She fought for 7 days in the hospital on her life. She died. Her brother is disabled for life. They cannot kill Jewish children and go free. We don't agree. 60 years after the Holocaust, we will not keep silent. 60 years after the Holocaust, they should know that there is a price for Jewish blood. Muhammad Abu Hanud was a major terrorist in Gaza. He did not become a suicide bomber. He taught others how to become suicide bombers. He told them how to build the vest, how many nails should be put inside the vest in order to kill the most amount of people, where exactly to stand on the buses in order to kill and to get the best results. One day, Muhammad Abu Hanud sent 2 terrorists to the Ben Yehuda market in Jerusalem. One suicide bomber wearing a suit, holding a suitcase, blew himself up in the middle of the market. All the buyers, all the shop owners, all the people came and rushed and helped the wounded, while another suicide bomber that stood on the other edge of the market came across the crowd, got involved with the people, and blew himself up. Many people got killed in this attack. A lot of students from Hebrew University got injured. We represent some of the people that got injured in a lawsuit against Syria and against Iran in the Federal District Court of Washington. Syria defend themselves. Syria hires a lawyer, an ex-Attorney General of the United States named Ramsey Clark, that comes to court. But Syria is not very happy about these cases, because on one hand, they want to pour millions of dollars into the hands of Hamas to kill more Jews. On the other hand, Syria does not want to be listed anymore in the watch list of the State Department. They don't want to be considered as a state-sponsored terrorism. They don't want the Congress to know that every other month we file another lawsuit against them, charging them with funding terrorism. Iran is a different story. When we file a lawsuit against Iran, they don't show up in court. We get a default judgment against them, usually for hundreds of millions of dollars. In the beginning, we collected some of this judgment, part of this judgment, against assets in the United States. We found a bank account that had a couple of millions of dollars in it, frozen from the day of the Shah, that belonged to the Iranian government. The State Department objected us and opposed us from collecting this bank account. We needed to hire a lobbyist. We hired Stuart Eisenstadt, a former Undersecretary of State, that helped us to pass a law in the Congress which overcame the State Department's objection, and we were able to collect this bank account for the terror victims. We also found a house that belonged to the son of the Shah. The son of the Shah wanted to learn how to fly a plane, so he came to Texas, and his father built him a house. We found this house, and we forced the sheriff to sell the house and to give us the money, which we forwarded to the terror victims. But when it comes to assets around the world, Iran acts differently. One day we get information that the National Oil Company of Iran has a bank account in Rome which has $500 million in it. We took our American judgments and domesticated them in Rome. Along with the motion of domestication, we asked the court to put a lien on the money. And the court did. The court issued a temporary restraining order and called the parties to a hearing in front of him in 10 days. This time, Iran not only sent lawyers to court, they got the Vatican involved, they sent representatives to court, they got the foreign ministry of the Italian government involved, they sent a representative to court, the National Oil Company sent lawyers to court, all the banks that had relationship with Iran sent lawyers to court. They were standing there, 20 lawyers, and screaming at the judge in Italian. They had two major arguments. One, you cannot collect the judgment against the Iranian government against the assets of the National Oil Company. They are not the same entities. They don't share the same assets. Their second argument was even more creative. They said that they didn't get an adequate notice about the lawsuit. 20 lawyers were standing there in court, and yet they claimed that they didn't get an adequate notice about the lawsuit. We hired an international law expert that testified in court that in regimes like Iran, there is no difference between the government to the national company, and you indeed can collect the government case against the government against the assets of the National Oil Company. We also claimed that the service that we did to Iran was sufficient. But the court, who wanted to go on the safe side, ordered us to reserve Iran. And in the meantime, he took off the lien. 1 hour after he took off the lien, Iran shifted the money from Rome to Thailand.